No, we're good.
All right. So, welcome, Sandra. I'm actually really excited to have you. This is going to be a very different episode from what people are used to. We're going to try it out. We're going to see what people think and go from there. But basically, instead of me interviewing an entrepreneur that's already established and really like understanding their story, I thought it would be cool to speak to someone like you who's just starting out, who has a lot of questions on what to do next, how to grow the company, etc. So, the ball is kind of in your court today. I want you to first start off by just introducing your business, Origin Travels, the general purpose and mission of the company, and then we'll get into the details of where you're at, where you want to go, and how I might be able to help you and provide some insight on next steps.
Amazing. So I'm Sandra. I am the owner and CEO of Origin Travels, an adventure travel company curating epic off the beaten path experiences for solo travelers looking to explore the world in like-minded company. So I'm really passionate about people getting out of the day-to-day and exploring something different, really immersing in the culture of that destination and doing so in like-minded company with people who kind of think the same way, exploring places really locally and seeing what that unique offering is, because I think every place in the world has something really special and very different, unique to offer. So
Yeah,
that
it
is
makes
the
sense. So
essence.
you're essentially, it's kind of like a travel guide group in a sense, right?
Yeah, so they're small group trips, maximum like 12 people, so that we can get like super hyper local, go visit small communities in those countries, or like get invited into somebody's home for breakfast in India. And because we had such a small group, we're
Oh,
able to do
fun.
things like that. And it's not like your typical tour of shuffling people on this like massive bus and you're following the flag around. So it's not that.
Yeah, makes sense. And so when did you start working on this? Did you found this on your own or do you have a partner?
So the company was actually founded in 2019, and the founder's name is Britt. So back at that time, she had had the company for about a year when I was at a crossroads in my own career, leaving the world of like PR agencies and trying to figure out what to do next and like where my passion was. And in like my free time, I was looking for a group to go camping with. My parents never took us camping in childhood. I feel like that's a
Oh,
really North
really?
American thing, but
Oh my
it's not
God,
a
I was
thing.
shipped off. I was shipped off. I was like I was born in Canada, but like in a very Ukrainian household. And 2 weeks every summer, we were just shipped off to sleepaway camp. Not even day camp, sleepaway camp. They were
Sleepaway
like,
camp.
bye.
Well, I guess there's
It
two
was
kinds
fun
of
though.
families, and my family is not a camping
Yeah.
family. They're like, why would we sleep on the ground when we could sleep in a hotel or like a cottage? So we did
Honestly,
cottages.
yeah. I do feel that way now that my parents have tormented me for years. But no, honestly, it's like an ongoing joke. I have two other siblings and they really hated it. But I liked it. Like I had a good group of girlfriends and we kind of
Yeah.
grew up in that organization together. So it was fun. But yeah, good to get out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So
I
you get all these really cool local experiences. Go on.
Yeah, so at that time, yeah, I had never gone camping as a kid. So I was looking for groups that were in Toronto but did like camping weekend trips, like someone that I could join who had the equipment and the experience. I was not confident doing it on my own. So I came across Origin Travels on Meetups, actually, like on the Meetup app. And she was running
Okay.
some camping trips for women and to 6 Mile Lake in Muskoka. And I was like, oh, that's amazing. And kind of started like looking at her website and her brand. And I really, really loved it and aligned with it. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to send her a DM, like see if she's looking for anybody to help with marketing and social. And she was like, I was actually about to put up a job listing. So this is amazing timing. And we met up and chatted at Ricardo's downtown and found
Mm,
like we're really aligned on our passions and like how we see the world and how we see these trips. So she gave me what started as a 2 month contract. And then we went to India together and then kind of went from there. So over the ups and downs, we kind of been like, I was doing contract stuff here and there. Obviously, during COVID, there was a period of about, I want to say 2 years where we couldn't run any international trips at all.
hmm
So
Yeah.
in that time, kind of helping like keep the community alive and keep the brand alive. And then earlier this year, she was looking to sell and have somebody else take it over. So it was official like end of March this year. So it's only been a few months. I'm very,
Wow.
yeah, it's very crazy 2023.
That's so cool. So you started off working for her and then
Yeah.
eventually she wanted to kind of step away and you're like, I see the opportunity. I'm passionate about
Yeah.
this business. I want to do something with this. So let me basically buy it from you and go from
Yes.
there, right?
Yes,
Oh,
exactly.
so cool. Okay, so where are you at now though in terms of like business growth? Are you keeping the branding? Like obviously things have shifted since before COVID to after, so I'm sure that you've had to make kind of a lot of modifications in the brand messaging as well. How are you feeling now about the brand overall and the business aspect of it too?
Yeah, so I'm keeping a lot of the core values of the trips and like the essence of the brand, who it attracts, and like that niche kind of audience. Because one of my absolute favorite things of I've gone on 6 trips now, even like before taking it over. And the best part of every single one of them is how much people just right away click and just connect.
Mm,
In
mm-hmm.
this past summer, we went to Algonquin, and it's a 3 hour drive from Toronto. And I want to say about like 20 minutes into the drive, everyone was just like oversharing. Like it was such a good vibe.
Yeah.
Everyone feels like they've known each other for a really long time. So I think the really niche branding attracts a certain kind of person and demographic, which has been one of my favorite parts of the trip. So keeping
Yeah.
that. They used to be all women's only. So I'm kind of shifting that away and keeping some departures to be women only and then opening up a few of them because over the time of like working with her, I had a lot of men in like their early 30s also want to find that community and find people to travel with who are going through those same life transitions of, your friends are getting married and having kids, or you just can't align your
Yeah.
vacation time because some people's busy seasons are here and some people's are here, and you just can't kind of like you can't get the trip out of the group chat. So you just want to sign up and join a group that's already going. So decided to open some of them up to everybody. That's been one of the changes. And then kind of figuring out, I guess, where people are interested in going, like what trips are going to be
Mm-hmm.
doing well over like the past 3 years of COVID. I think people like there are trends in travel and there's places that people are interested in going.
Yeah.
So finding that balance of like, where are people interested, but is still kind of off the beaten path, but not too far off the beaten
Yeah.
path that people aren't going to be
Mm-hmm.
interested in going. So Egypt was my first new launch this year in 2024. So kind of figuring out the destinations. And then my other piece of focus is building out the private side of the business. So besides the group trips, wanting to expand on private planning. Historically, we've worked with like yoga instructors to run private yoga retreats for their
Oh,
communities.
cool.
So that part, and then I want to get into like food content creators, Pilates instructors, kind of anybody on that wavelength of wanting to run trips for their community.
Yeah, it's honestly, it sounds really similar. I interviewed Lisa Homsey, who's an influencer from Montreal, who is a travel influencer. And so she's been traveling the world. And she recently just started her own basically travel touring company, similar in line with you. Right now, her trips are kind of revolving around her and her followers and all of
Yeah.
that because that's where she got her clients initially, but
Yeah.
similarly to you, she's looking to expand and how can she continue and support other brands and people, influencers, to do the same thing using the same format. Because what was cool with her is that she made so many incredible local connections. And like you were saying, it's like, off the beaten path and you could visit a family and things like that. It's like that for me personally is always my favorite part of any travel
Yeah.
experience. Like I'm not interested in being in like the hottest touristy spots. And when I catch myself there, kind of like in transition or moving from one place to another, I'm like, why am I here? Like it's so crowded, it's so uncomfortable. My favorite parts always end up being those little quaint things. Like Ryan and I, my husband and I were just in Italy, and we went north of Positano and we're with like basically a family doing a cooking class. She was there with her children. It was her grandmother's recipes. Like there was so much history there. Everything we cooked with was from her garden. Like of all the things, we were there for 10 days. That was my favorite part of the
Yeah.
trip. It was just so beautiful and so special. So I totally see and appreciate how you can kind of bring those more, I guess, like personalized and catered experiences through your trips, which is cool. So from
Yeah. And
a
finding
business perspective, like go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say finding the right balance, because there's obviously like
Yeah.
spots that are popular for a reason. We're not going to go to Egypt and not see the
Hmm.
pyramids. Like, we're going to go see the pyramids, although
Right.
that is probably the most touristy part of the entire trip. But then once we go down south,
Yeah.
we're going to be having like dinner at our boat captain's home at the end of a day of sailing the islands. So finding that like a mix
Yeah.
of
Makes sense.
those authentic experiences. But I can't take
Yeah,
people to Egypt and
exactly.
not
I
show
agree
them the
because it's nice
pyramids.
to like see everything. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. Like you want to see the main attractions, but not spend all day there. Because,
Yeah.
man, especially in the summer, Europe, for instance,
Yeah.
just like sardines, like you can't
I
move
know.
around. It's insane. Okay, so I want to focus now more on like your business and the marketing and how you want it to grow. I know that you have some questions for me in terms of all of those elements, maybe some around like entrepreneurship as well. So where do you currently feel, I guess, the most stuck, and how can I help you based on my experience?
Um, it's been really like ironing out the messaging and trying to get everything aligned and like the branding. And I think that's feeling like it's in a really good place. I'm also relaunching a
Hmm.
new website, so it'll allow for more details and hopefully like an easier booking process, as we were finding that Shopify wasn't really working for it's more like e-commerce kind of actual physical products. And because this is service based, I'm like, oh, it's not like really working. So that was a big pain
Hmm.
point. But now we're just waiting for the domain to transfer over. So I think that will be good. But I guess tips for like feeling like the messaging is good, like my marketing strategy is good. How do I know that how do I know that I'm attracting the right clients, and how do I get in front of those right people?
Well, I mean, if you're confident in your messaging, I would say check it again, even because I feel like I'm constantly looking over and refining my messaging. Like I'm literally doing that right now with my podcast. I'm doing it with Nomad Creative. I'm kind of in this phase where I'm like reframing like who is my target audience. And the best piece of advice that I've received is that the more specific you are, the better. And when you're specifying to a point where you feel like it might actually be too specific, that's when you know you're on the right track, because
Okay.
you would be surprised at how many people are in that specific niche that you're looking to attract. So, for example, like if all you're doing is looking to attract people who want to travel, that's kind of everybody, right? There's no
Yeah.
niche, there's no specific. But if you're speaking to someone who wants to travel in a group setting off the beaten path, at least once a year, for example, that's way more specific. So when you
Right.
call that out to people and they read that, they're like, oh, this really resonates with me. This is me, whereas like, oh, I want to travel, because like every other website, like that
Yeah.
offers these types of things is going to say that. Don't you want to travel and see the world? Like, yeah, duh, everyone does. But like, what is it specific about who you're targeting that you can call out to then speak to them specifically? Because then every time that you communicate with your audience, whether it's on social media or in marketing material, emails, it could be through podcasts, interviews, whatever it is, even when you're just like advertising yourself, the clearer you are on who you're speaking to, the better. And then people will resonate. And I feel like that's been kind of the most effective for me in terms of who to connect with, right? And then you asked about how to, if you know you're reaching the right people, kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you don't know. It's trial and error. And that's really what it is. I think with like if I relate it back to Nomad Creative and I see how our clientele has changed over the years, it's been very much a reflection of my offerings as well.
Mhm.
So like I'm a very strong believer that whatever you put out, you will get back. So if you're putting something out that's $1,000 and that's what you feel it's valued at, you will attract people that are willing to pay that $1,000. But if you put something out that's $10,000 price point, you're going to attract people that are willing to pay that $10,000, right? And so it's just being mindful of like when you are targeting and stuff, like what is their like household income and where do they live? Like all of those things matter, obviously. But yeah, just really understanding that aspect, I think, is important. Make sense?
Yeah, and pricing is such a big one and has been a bit of a pain point in the last few months as well, just because I feel like we land somewhere in the mid-range compared. There are options that are way more expensive for group trips, and then there are options that are cheaper that I just, as a small business, cannot compete with because these are huge
Mm-hmm.
companies.
Yeah.
So I guess what's been kind of, well, one, what's been really hard is like having those conversations where people kind of make you feel bad about it, where they're like, oh my God, you're charging that much. It's so expensive. And I've
They're
like
not your
really taken it
clients.
personally until,
Nope.
yes, and like trying to shift that perspective of like, okay, they're just not my person. And even if I lowered the price
Yeah.
$500, they probably still wouldn't pay it. Or even if I lowered it $1,000, they probably still wouldn't pay
Yeah.
it. And
Well,
we're
there's
not,
your literal answer. That's your answer.
yeah,
That's how you know. Like if they're pushing back, they're not your client. And don't waste your time or energy on that either. Because like one thing that I found is especially when you're starting out, you kind of just want to like pull and grab at anything that comes your way. But that's
yeah,
not necessarily the best way to do things because then you're putting your energy and resources to someone who's not really seeing the value of your services. So like perhaps it's also an issue of you not doing a good job at really selling the value, but also in combination with like, listen, at the end of the day, there's always going to be people coming your way that just don't have the budget, that are not willing to spend that much.
yeah,
So until they really understand like what they're getting and they have that money to spend, because typically if someone's pushing back, it's because they don't have the money to spend. And that means they're
yeah,
not your target audience, you know?
yeah. Yeah, and
Yeah.
like at the end of the day, group travel is not the cheapest way of travel. You're paying for like the convenience of having somebody else plan it for you. You're paying for the
Mm-hmm.
community that you're traveling with. You're paying for like essentially it's the benefit of an all-inclusive where you don't have to worry about anything but the adventure of a backpacking trip. And that's kind of how I've like thought about
Ooh,
it
I
and
like that.
positioned it.
Yeah,
So you
good
get
job.
that little bit of best of both worlds. I've done a lot of budget backpacking, so pulling from those like
Yeah.
really good on the ground experiences, but then you don't have to worry about it because those types of trips are not relaxing. they, you are always
Oh yeah,
thinking about how
you're
you're going to
moving
catch the
all the
bus.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where's the bus station? How are you going to get there? How are you going to get to your next place? What if there's like an issue on the, like there's so many things that happen. So it's not that kind of um, trip.
And I feel like that's something that you should really leverage too, you know, because if that's something that's a pain point of travelers that you're taking away from them because you're doing all the planning and all they have to do is follow along and enjoy the good parts about backpacking, then like, why not highlight that? Why not sell it like that, you know?
Yeah.
And just kind of thinking like, what's your unique selling proposition? I feel like that to me is somewhat like of a unique selling proposition, right?
Yeah.
So, and the way that you're positioning it as opposed to just like a general travel trip, especially if it's for backpackers, it's like, you know, like the luxury of a regular trip mixed with, you know, I guess I don't know, I can't find my words, like
Ease
the
of an
grunt work
all-inclusive.
of backpacking. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Oh, there you go. You said it already. Ease of all inclusive. That's actually perfect. I really like that. You need to use that if you're not
Yeah.
already.
I haven't.
All right, what
I'm
else?
gonna write that down. But yeah, I feel like
Yeah, you
I'm in
need
that
to
life
use that.
stage. Yeah. Making notes. In that life stage of like, I don't want to go backpacking anymore. I don't want to sleep on the floor of trains.
Yeah.
I don't want to sleep in 10-person shared dorm rooms. I don't want to do that anymore. And I think people get to that age of like, you know, you're in your 30s, you don't want to do it anymore, but you still want the
Mhm.
adventure.
Yeah, been there, done that. You get the adventure at an all-inclusive resort, essentially.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. So would you even
So what
say
else?
to go as far as like specifying the age? Because I would say for the
Yeah.
most part, the people who have been on these trips are like late 20s to 30s. And then sometimes we'll get somebody who's like in their 40s, sometimes we'll get someone who's in their early 20s, but and it doesn't really change the dynamic of the group again because I think it just attracts a certain kind of person that even if they're like 42, they still have that same like adventurous mindset. And
Mhm.
I guess I've been afraid to kind of call out the age in case somebody's looking at it and they're like 25, but they feel 30, but they're like, oh, but I'm not in my 30s. Do I not go on this
Yeah.
trip?
Yeah, no, I think I hear you where you're coming from, but again, like the specificity is what's actually going to attract and retain people as opposed to like being more general and hoping that you're going to attract anyone who's interested, right? So it's kind of doing like the opposite effect if you think about it by really
Yeah.
focusing in and honing in on that target audience that you want. Doesn't mean that people who are a little younger or a little older can't join. They can join. But for your marketing efforts to be the most effective, you want to be targeting a specific group of people. So, like, who are they? What do they like to do? How old are they? Where do they live? Like, all of those things be like hyper specific. And you can have different target audiences too. And right, maybe you have even trips that are targeted towards an older group of people. So, if someone who's in, let's say, their 50s wants to do a trip as well, maybe doesn't want to be backpacking,
Yeah.
then you can cater a trip around that and then have that be a different target audience. But if you're looking, especially when you're in the early phases and starting a company, again, be more specific, like focus in on that one age group, find out all of the strategies and the flows that make sense within that target, and then apply that same framework to any other target audience because you're like, oh, this really worked for these people. Not that it's always copy paste, but you can definitely use the framework as a guide to then promote in other like age categories and different types of trips, right? Like there's always
Yeah.
that kind of like varying factor that you can switch out. But once you have the secret recipe and you find something that works, typically you can kind of go in and change a few elements depending on who you're targeting and still be successful with the same process.
Right. Right. Yeah, that totally makes sense. So on
Your wheels are turning.
they are just making mental notes. I'll just listen back to this after.
Yeah, exactly. I'll send you the
Uh,
transcription.
yeah. On a more, I guess, life work kind of note, how do you manage life work balance and how did you do it when you first started out? I feel like it's so hard there's literally
Yeah,
days where I'm like, I have been at my laptop for like 13 hours and you're like, okay,
I
I need to
know.
go outside.
But do you hate it? Do you hate it? Or do you like kind of get like lost in the sauce and you're like, oof, like I just got a lot of shit done. Like, how do you feel after that
Yeah.
13 hours? Do you feel energized or do you feel burnt out?
For now, I've been feeling energized. And I guess the
Hmm.
bigger kind of negative feeling comes from like guilt on days where I'm like not putting in, I feel like I'm not putting enough time, or like a weekend
Hmm.
when you're just like doing other things and then kind of feel like, oh, I didn't do anything this weekend. I feel so behind. But there's always
Yeah.
something to do and there's always more work to be done. So
Yeah, yes, there always is, and I think like beating yourself up about it won't change anything. So stop. That's my number one piece of advice. But I feel you. Like when I started off, I was really bad at setting boundaries for myself. I was also working another job, which was a bit of like a security net for me. So I had that income coming in. It wasn't like a full-time thing. I was a flight attendant, so like it was like super random days, hours. Sometimes I would be gone for like three days at a time, or like in the middle of the night if it was like a red eye. So my schedule was kind of all over the place, and so I just kind of took whatever time I had to work on my business. I did have clients, so I was doing pretty much all the work in the beginning. I mean, I didn't really have a team when I started Nomad Creative, and I really burnt out. Like I had no sense of like time, no sense of, I guess, alignment with like my mind and my body. And I think those are like the most important things to listen to. That's why I asked you, it's like, do you feel energized or do you feel burnt out? Because I think the more that you do it, the more that you realize like, listen, like you have another day, you're going to do the work. Like if you try and cram it all in one day and you're exhausted and you're working from a place where like you don't have all of the energy, your brain power isn't all there, you're not as focused, it's going to take you twice as long, three times as long to get the same thing done than if you were to come and do it with the energy and enthusiasm that you want to be putting in towards your business, right? And I think
yeah.
like intention is so important in any work that you're doing. So like really loving what you're doing when you're doing it. Not to say that you're going to love everything that you do in your business, but to be mindful in the things that you're doing and not doing them because like you you have to. Like, I think that there is a time where you can get support from friends, family, and then eventually like other people to help support you within
Yeah.
your business. But the second you start burning yourself out, I think it's like it's a recipe for disaster. Like, you're going to drive yourself to burnout. You're not going to want to do what you're doing anymore. You're going to feel like it's a chore to work on your business. Like, you want to be excited, you want to be
Yeah.
inspired. And I think that recognizing when you're feeling at that breaking point, like obviously recognizing before you get there, because we don't want to get there, and then saying, you know what, I'm going to stop for today, and that's okay. And if it means taking a whole day, take the whole day. It doesn't mean, you have to work 9 to 5. You could work 9 to 5. For some people, the structure works really well. And over the years, I personally found that falling into more of that routine has been helpful with my business specifically. But I worked this weekend because I wanted to, because I felt inspired, because I was thinking about my new messaging for my podcast and I was getting excited. So I put in the work because I wanted to, and that's okay. So it's like, you have these boundaries. They're still kind of fluid. Understanding that as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, sometimes you have to do things you don't really love, but just knowing when to stop, to take a break, to not allow yourself to burn out so that you can keep that flame of like inspiration and excitement, I think is super important. And so there's no right or wrong way. There's no too much time, not enough time. Obviously, you got to motivate yourself sometimes more days than other, but having
Yeah.
some kind of structure and some kind of routine, I think, has been the most helpful for me personally in being able to establish that balance. And when I turn off, I can turn off completely and not really have to worry about what's going on behind my office doors, you know?
And when did you know that it was the right time to leave your other job? Was it like financial goal that you set, or was it like a revenue goal, or just the time feeling?
Yeah, no, I don't think anyone should really plan around like a financial goal. And I'm feeling this more as I'm growing my business, and recognizing that growth isn't just about the dollar amount. Like, there's a lot more change and growth that you could do within your business that doesn't necessarily result in more money. So, for
Mhm.
example, like this last year, I've removed myself from day-to-day communications with the client. Like, I'm really much just focused on the business aspect, on onboarding and sales for clients. And then everything else from a project basis, my entire team takes care of from A to Z. I'll kind of oversee everything as it comes through and give final approvals, but I'm not involved in the project as I once was. I used to be the one to communicate with the client, manage the project, jump on weekly calls with them. Like, that took up a lot of my time and stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and so I've been able to do that. But from a business and monetary standpoint, my business didn't grow as much as I wanted it to, because I had this plan that I wanted to double year after year. And I was doing that until this year, because I realized that, I pulled myself away from certain internal resources. I had to put my time and effort into making sure the team can operate without me. I started a podcast. So all of these things happened. It didn't necessarily bring me to the income that I wanted to bring in, but that doesn't mean I didn't grow, right? So it's like, I grew a podcast. I started a podcast, so I grew in that sense, expanding my business in that regard. I grew because I'm now, relying on an entire team, and I'm not necessarily operating within the business. I hired a paid media agency to support with ads and stuff like that. So all of these things that I wasn't doing before that I'm doing now are really, I guess, like the change in growth. So I don't know if that answered your question. I feel like I kind of talked in circles a little.
Well, I guess it's coming from the same, I'm in the same position as you were when you started, as I have a full-time job. So on the one hand,
Right.
I
Oh,
feel
you
like,
said, when is the right time to go?
yeah.
Go ahead.
So on the one hand,
On the
you're
one
like,
hand,
well,
yeah.
if I could put in more time into the business, I know that it would grow faster. But then maybe it's okay to have a slower growth where like I know I can still pay my bills.
Yeah. I mean, it's up to you. Okay, wait. So let's go back to your question, because I feel like I definitely didn't answer your question, and I spoke around it. You were asking like, when did I feel like it was the right time to go and
Yeah.
to leave my full-time job? It was kind of like a timing thing a little bit. So I was living in Toronto at the time, and like flying out of Pearson Airport. So when my husband, who's in the military, got stationed to Trenton, Ontario, we bought a house here. I knew we would have to move here. I was still consulting at the time at a digital marketing agency while also working as a flight attendant with Air Canada. So I technically had like two jobs and also running Nomad Creative. So I was kind of at a point where I was like, number one, it's too much. And number two, I'm about to leave Toronto anyway.
Yeah.
So I left flying. I stayed with the digital marketing agency for a few more months and then eventually left them and then transitioned to Nomad Creative full time. So it wasn't necessarily like a conscious decision, like now is the time. It all happened kind of organically. But I would just say sometimes you have to take the leap and just go for it. But if you're not in a position where you could live off of no money, then having a secondary income is nice. And maybe having a whole full-time job is not the greatest because, you know, as a flight attendant, I definitely had a lot of flexibility and a lot of time off, which is like part of the reason why I was able to launch and grow my company in the first few years while still doing that. I don't know that I would have had the same growth had I not had as much free time as I had.
Yeah. So just kind of like letting it flow and I guess deciding when it feels like it's the right time to just kind of put everything into the business.
Yeah, there's no right or wrong answer. Just kind of like follow your gut and go with what feels right. You know, also it's like you could set parameters for yourself if you're like, you know, if you want to have, you know, a certain amount of savings and have a goal to make like X amount of money before this time. And if not, then, you know, maybe I'll go and get a part-time job to continue to support me or whatever, but not necessarily to have something to fall back on. Cause sometimes I think you need that fire under your ass to be like, shit, I need to make money to like actually put in the work and make the money. But it's also like not fun to be working from a place where you're stressed about, you know, your livelihood. So you definitely want to be mindful of that. If you don't have to put yourself in that position, personally, I wouldn't, but everyone does it differently. So no right or wrong answer.
Yeah. That I guess goes into taking risks and how you approach that in your business.
Honestly, it's kind of a weird question because I don't feel like there's been much risk involved in building Nomad Creative. I would say probably the biggest risk I took was this year, which to be honest, didn't pay off whatsoever. That is definitely a bigger conversation to be had that I really want to talk to everyone about on the podcast. But basically, in summary, we have grown organically every single year for the first 5 years. And at, you know, the 5 year mark, I was like, okay, like I want to continue to double my business. And if I do that, like it's going to take more than just sitting back and waiting for the word of mouth. So I worked with a paid media agency. We spent a shit ton of fucking money setting all kinds of things up through like email campaigns, ads, blah, 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 blah. And honestly didn't see a return at all. So a lot of money went out. This was like the biggest risk that I took. I never had to really take a risk with it within my business because I really only spend money on my freelancers to pay who are doing the work for the clients, you know? So like there's very little risk involved in that regard. But this time I was like, okay, like I have to take this risk. I have to reinvest back into the company, or I should say I want to, not have to. And so I did that and I had like mixed reviews from people. Some people were like, yes, that's really good to do in your industry. And other people were like, I don't really see the benefit of doing it in your industry. But I was like, you know what, worst case scenario, even if I were to land one client, it would probably cover the costs, like not a big loss, this and that. And in the like 6 months that we worked together, we didn't actually land a client through those efforts. So thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars are being spent and nothing comes in. And I'm here just trying to be patient and like, I hope it'll work. And it didn't work. And we obviously learned a lot of lessons in the sense that like the type of industry that I'm in, it's just so saturated and overpopulated that it's very challenging to rank up on Google for like a general creative agency, right? Whereas like if you're selling a specific product or a very, very specific service, again, going back to like specificity, that is always more effective. So like we run ads for other of our clients and companies and they do great. But I wanted to work with a bigger digital marketing agency to learn from them, get the best in the biz. Like they work with huge companies like Arden, and I kind of got screwed in the end. So that's not been fun. But that was kind of like the biggest risk. The thing, it's like, what are you going to do at that point? It's like, you can sit, you can sulk, you can cry. Or you can say, all right, what did I learn from this? And what will I never do again? Or how will I do things differently moving forward? So I think that's like the most recent and relevant example when it comes to risk. But yeah, I think it's like in anything, I think when you're approaching something that has risk, you have to consider all of the possible outcomes. And the outcome that I didn't consider was not getting anything from it. Like I didn't think that was possible. I was like, there's no way I'm going to spend all this money and not get at least one person convert, not one person converted. So I really didn't think that was a possibility, and it was a possibility. And it's a really shitty truth, but that's what it is. So now, it puts me in a position where it's like, all right, what do I do now? Like, how do I kind of remedy this? And so I'm just, going back to my initial like outreach practices and doing what I know works, networking, connecting, all of these things. And then I obviously have this podcast, which has been a nice new way to connect with people. So yeah, it's been fun. It's been an interesting year.
Yeah, ads are tough. It kind of sometimes feels like you're just putting it out into the internet and then you're like, where did it go?
I know, but it's crazy because like there are so many impressions and stuff like that. But I was really like trusting this agency, which is really also probably my other fault, is because I personally didn't have as much knowledge in this space. Like with my business, I hire experts to deal with these things, right? But I wanted to hire an agency who could basically bring me more value than I thought a freelancer could, which is so funny because the way that I run my business is with freelancers for my clients, and we do such a great job. But for whatever reason with this, I was like, let me get an agency. And I ended up being so disappointed on every step of the way. If anything, it was like really humbling to see what they were putting out versus what I put out, because it made me like really proud of how we support our clients and the type of service that we provide and how we present things and how we communicate with our clients. Because as someone who is now on the other side, being the client, I was like really disappointed. And I was like, I get it now. Like, I get it when clients are upset or lose patience or get something that they didn't expect to get or get blindsided with certain numbers and this and that. Like transparency and communication is so important in building that relationship with a client. And I feel that so much more now. If I learned anything, it's that, like I feel my clients now when shit goes bad, it's like, not that it goes bad often, but it does sometimes, we're not perfect. I feel for them because I felt it. And so, yeah, fun stuff.
Yeah, communication's key.
Yep. Anything else, girl?
Yeah, I had one more question, I guess. Which, let's say, 3 aspects of business building do you think are the most important in that first 3 years?
Well, I think you're already doing some of this right. In the sense that this is like the first thing that you mentioned about like being clear on your goal, your target, your audience, your messaging. Like, I think that is super important. Whenever brands come to us with like an idea, the first thing that we always say is like, get that in order and then build a really strong brand and marketing strategy to support that. So like define who you are, what you do, how you talk, how you walk, all of those key elements, as if you were to define your company as a human being, right? All the characteristics you can imagine, the adjectives, the keywords, etc. Once that's clear, you know who you're talking to. And then everything else that you do and you build out, all of the research that you do is going to be around that target audience. So being clear on that would be number 1. Number 2 would be having that strong brand and marketing strategy. So using that information that you have from building out that target persona, right? And then doing the research. Who are the competitors? What are they doing well? What are they doing not so well? Are there things that we can use for inspiration, or what are we doing differently that can, allow us to differentiate ourselves and use that as a strategy, right? To stand out. I always say that the strategy portion is such an important foundation, that a lot of brands overstep, like they skip entirely, and then it's like you have nothing to fall back on. So it's like when you start, if you're just posting on social media and you don't have a strategy, it's like, well, what are you posting about? How often are you posting? Who are you communicating to? Why are you posting videos versus photos? Why are you, there are so many questions, and there's no rationale, nothing to pull from. And what's dangerous about that is that it's hard to then go back and analyze if something was successful or not, because you don't have anything like clearly set in stone that you followed as a guide to see if it's going to work or not, right?
Right.
So again, one, having that clear messaging, who you are as a brand. Number two, building out that strong brand and marketing strategy. And for someone who's not familiar, brand strategy is very much focused on like the brand and who they are, where we want to go with the brand vision, all of that. And then the marketing strategy is more so like, what different marketing initiatives can we take in order to help you achieve your goals? So that could be through social media, it could be through CSR, it could be through testimonials, through email marketing, right? And then that last step, I would say, is being consistent. Be consistent, believe in what you're putting out, and don't stop. And if you see that there are certain setbacks or certain things aren't working, adjust, revise, go back, make changes. I do that all the time with my business. It's constantly changing. But the consistency is in putting things out there, right? Seeing what's working, what's not working, and listening to the market. Because if you're not consistent, you won't have anything to go back on again to see what's working or what isn't working. You're going to, by not being consistent, the problem is you're not being consistent. There's nothing to see and to get that data from. So I know people like stats and data, and it's a thing, so if you're putting things out there, whether it's being consistent in email campaigns, like how many are you sending out? Is it a weekly thing? Do you send it out like once every 4 months, or like randomly when you feel like it? Like having some kind of schedule is always really helpful. Same thing with like social media, planning something in advance, scheduling it, just putting it out there, and then really dedicating some time every day to do that engagement and connect with your community.
Right. On that note, one more actually question that comes to mind.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's different for everybody's business, and I've gotten kind of like mixed reviews, and me, like from being like social media freelancing prior to this, have always given a lot of like small businesses the advice of putting your face out there, and like your face is the brand. How much of that do you think would be relevant to like a travel company like this? Like, should I be putting my face on the Instagram?
It's honestly, it's a personal decision, and it's not for every company. I think it's really dependent on what your goals are. Number one. Number two, if you're comfortable and if you feel like you can and want to be that sales representative and the face of the brand, so like if I'm comparing, let's say you to Lisa Homsey. So Lisa Homsey is an established influencer. People know who she is. People are coming on these trips because of her. So in that situation, of course, I would say, yes, use your name, build up a community. And then eventually, if you want to grow your business where, maybe she's not the one leading the trips, but is still the one to help organize and do more stuff on the back end, and then eventually build a team, then that makes sense. But I would say for her case, definitely like use your community, because people are following her and want to go on trips with her. Whereas like with you, you have more of a personal brand. Let's say you have your friends and family community. You're not necessarily like crazy famous on social media. So if you were to just post a random trip, you're not going to have 50 people sign up. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, not to say that you can't build that up, but I would say that's where you have more of a choice. Whereas like, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it one way or the other. It's more of like a personal preference. And it doesn't mean that just because you choose not to necessarily be the face of the brand doesn't mean that you can't still show up, that you can't still sometimes put a video out of you talking to the audience or of you traveling and this and that, like maybe it's your personal travel reel that gets reposted on the page, things like that. Definitely fine. I think it's cool. But then that's more of like a founder feature type situation as opposed to like the founder being the real like driving force of the company. So
Right.
it depends on like the future, right? Like where do you see the company going? Do you feel like you want to be the one to guide every single trip moving forward? Or do you feel like you want to build a team and have other people support you on that?
Yeah. It's something to think about.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
It's such a tough one because you're like, oh, I know that it definitely helps in certain scenarios, and I have been like testing it out, and I get a lot of engagement on like the stories that I'm and my face is in, and like people.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a trust thing, especially with like something like
Yeah.
travel. It's not a t-shirt. It's a huge investment of like someone's giving me 8 of their like 15 vacation days and a lot of money. It's a huge financial investment traveling in general. And it actually still like it makes me so emotional to think that people like trust and will like come to the ends of the earth on these trips. So it's so nice. But yeah, I can see where that would benefit in terms of like trusting in the brand and like where you're going and where your money is going and where your time is going. Two very valuable things.
Yeah, I agree with that. The trust aspect is really important. I, in the first few years of business, chose not to really show my face, just because I didn't want to and it was
Yeah.
unnatural. And it's funny because just the other day I was like, my notes app on like my phone and my computer, that's like where I take all of my notes. Like it has thousands of notes. And for whatever reason, I had this one random one pinned. But I hadn't really looked back at it. And I clicked it yesterday and it was from 2021. And there was a thing where it said podcast. And I had a list of a checklist for podcast. And I didn't even realize how long it's been since I've been thinking about putting out a podcast. And then in 2023 is when I actually ended up doing it. It's funny because the list had like 5 things to check off and nothing was checked off, but I was already thinking about it, right?
Yeah.
But I was like, do I want to put my face forward? Do I not? Whatever. And, it's not like this podcast is my business. But there's definitely a connection, right, in the things that we're talking
Right.
about because I help brands basically like build, launch, and grow their brands.
Yeah.
So we do that in terms of helping them with social media, with marketing, with branding, and all those key aspects. And I initially kind of wanted to do this to connect with other entrepreneurs, but now obviously doing something like with you, you're still an entrepreneur, but more in like the earlier phases. Like it's not
Yeah.
always just about learning from like people who've achieved the success, but also the ones who are going through it. I think that that's important because we're paying attention to like today relevant times, like what's happening now, what's it like to grow a business now, and what are people facing growing businesses like today in this moment. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate you coming on and talking about your
Yeah.
company and asking all the questions. I hope my insights were helpful.
Super helpful. And making all the notes. Also in my
Okay,
notes
good.
app. That is where all my notes are too.
Yeah. Honestly, it's pretty chaotic, but I mean, there's a
It is
search
really
feature. So like
chaotic.
for me, the search feature, it's just like my saving grace.
When I discovered the pinning feature, I was like, oh, game changer. Now I can just pin the ones I always need that I look at like every
Yes.
day, and then everything else just gets put down. But yeah,
Yeah,
it's the best.
exactly. Same.
Including a
Such a good
grocery
tool.
list. It's in there too.
Yeah, honestly, we are old school with our grocery list. We write it on like a post-it for whatever reason. Every now and again, we'll put it in our phone, but it's definitely because we have this ongoing list in our house, so it's just in the kitchen.
Yeah.
We're old school like that.
That's fun.
Okay. Do you have any final questions before I let you go?
No, I think that's it.
Okay, cool. Well,
It's
you
been
know where to
fun.
find me
Yes.
if anything comes up. And to anyone listening, I hope this was helpful. If any of you are in the earlier phases of starting your businesses or brands, I would love to hear from you. I'd love to do something like this with you too. If you found this was helpful and could relate, great. Let me know. I would love to hear from you. Otherwise, I think that's it for us, Sandra. Um, where can people find you on social media?
Instagram at Origin Travels. The website is www.origin-travels.com and Facebook Origin Travels Trips.
Perfect. And you know what I just realized? So typically we do what's called the mindful minute on the podcast, and I didn't do it with you, but I'm going to do it with you because it's a
Okay.
different format. And usually I'm the one like doing the interview questions. So I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, usually it's like the last thing on my list where I'm like, oh yeah, mindful minute. But we're gonna change up the order and like end it with this because
Okay.
I think regardless of where you are at in your journey, like you've still obviously learned so much along the way. So the mindful minute is really where you get to share one piece of advice that you've learned from your life so far that you feel anyone listening might be able to benefit from.
Trust your gut. I think that's been a big one. And I have had a hard time learning it along the way, is like second
Mm-hmm.
guessing all of my decisions and thoughts and kind of like trying to get a lot of people's different opinions. But at the end of the day, you know what you need and you know you need to do. And I feel like listening to that and taking time away from like the day to day to really hear what your intuition is telling you is so important in all aspects of life, not just business.
I agree.
Yeah.
Love it. Yep. In all aspects, it's all connected.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here, Sandra. Guys, thank you for
Thanks.
listening. Until next time. Bye.
Bye.